never 100% sure when it like literally starts, but yeah. Come on, Zoom. There we go. And we are live. Welcome, everybody, to day 20 of Thriving in the Face of Cancer. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and for the next 11 days, I'll be talking to top doctors and other healthcare professionals, as well as people who have survived cancer, and sometimes they're both, on how you too can thrive, even in the face of cancer. My guest today is Alison Tierney, and she is a board-certified oncology dietitian and a cancer thriver. Please welcome her to the show. Nice to meet you, Alison.
It's nice to meet you as well. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I can't wait to hear your story because, well, first of all, you're plant-based, which I love, which qualifies you to be on the show anyway. Yeah. And you're a plant-based dietitian, which I love, but you're also an oncology dietitian. But you have a story of your own cancer, which I want to hear. And you used the word thriver, and I'm interested. Some people use the word thriver, some people use the word survivor. If there is a difference, explain it and why you choose thriver.
Yeah, that's a really great question. Well, number one, I define a survivor as somebody at day one of diagnosis. And I think sometimes people interpret survivor differently. However, that's my definition. At day one of diagnosis, you are considered a survivor. Now, I would call myself a survivor, but I do like to use thriver because I feel like it is a lot more empowering. From the standpoint of, yes, I went through this really unfortunate, horrible thing. However, despite it and beyond it, I am thriving despite the challenges that it brought. So that's really why I like to use the word thriver. And I think anybody could use either of those words interchangeably, and you'll probably hear me say both of them, but I do like to focus on thriving really truly from the empowerment standpoint.
Yeah, I love that word too. And I know some people say you have to be a certain time not having cancer because it's interesting because the guest who has 14 years lung cancer on Saturday, she didn't consider herself a survivor, but she considered herself a thriver because, I mean, this minutia of like, you still have it, can cancer be cured? Can it be managed? But my feeling is, if you're not dead, you're a survivor. Honestly, it doesn't matter. So, but I do love the word thriver, which is why I call this series Thriving in the Face of Cancer. And I'm not going to be able to do it every day forever. I committed to January, but I would like to then do it at least once a week and maybe call it Thrivers Thursday and include people, not even necessarily that have overcome cancer or are dealing with cancer, but there's a lot of people that are dealing with a lot of other stuff that I think they have great stories to tell.
Absolutely. And I think really what many people will find when they're listening to the show, or if they've gone through their own experiences, is that each individual that has encountered cancer or another chronic illness or tragedy or whatever it might be in their life do relate to things differently. So what I might find empowering for myself might not be empowering to somebody else, and that's okay. And I think it's more of the awareness and the acceptance that we all think of it differently and we all feel differently, just as unique as our cancer journeys are, how we move through things, how we accept or don't accept things, all that is very independent and individualized to us.
Well, let's talk about how you got on the show, because this was really interesting, because I honestly hadn't heard of you until I did hear of you. And then, of course, I investigated you, and it turned out you were one of the speakers in a conference I've spoke at a few times, The Real Truth About Health. So that means you're vetted already. But what happened is I'm friends with Brenda Davis, and she's always following up on me and asking me who I am, how I'm doing. And so I said, well, would you like to be on the show? Because, I think there's some good things that we could talk about, nutrition and cancer and, both for prevention and also for people going through treatment. She said, yes, I would. She said, but I feel like you should get Alison Tierney on, who is, an oncology registered dietitian. And she wasn't even sure if you were plant-based, but she felt you were the best person for the job. And so that is quite an honor for Brenda Davis to give her slot away.
I am very honored. And if she's watching this, thank you, Brenda. That is so kind of you and thoughtful. Thank you.
Yeah, and we'll have her back, I'm sure soon that she'll be able to add things to the conversation. So we have a lot of things to talk about, and let's try to do it in the chronological time, since well, I'd like to know your story about when you became plant-based and why, and were you already a dietitian, and because I'm interested in that, because I feel like it must be challenging for somebody that is already plant-based to maybe go through dietetic school because of some of the things they teach. And of course, when you got cancer, and that whole journey. So take it away, Alison.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I truly believe that my cancer journey slash nutrition and plant-based journey all started way back actually when I was a kid. I was actually an athlete. I competed at a very high competitive level all the way through college. And I was actually really interested in being a dietitian in maybe about high school because I was really interested in how nutrition could naturally fuel my performance as an athlete. I wanted to know how I could recover better, run faster, all the things. And so that's where like nutrition really started to get ingrained in me. However, there's kind of a funny thing is that I ended up not going to school to be a dietitian, and I ended up going to college and getting a business degree in leadership and management. And the reason I did that is because I really kind of doubted my capabilities to be able to do science. Because when you're a dietitian, you do go through chemistry and biology, organic chemistry, all the things, right? And I wasn't really set in my ability to do science. And so I kind of did the family route. And my family comes from a long line of entrepreneurs. And so I'm like, I'm just going to go to the business route. That's what I'm good at, essentially. However, during that time when I was in college, my freshman year of college, my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer. And my senior year of college, my grandfather was diagnosed with liver cancer. And prior to my birth, my maternal grandmother passed away from cancer. I have my other grandmother on the other side is a breast and uterine survivor. And my godmother, who's my mom's cousin, is also a cancer survivor. And so after all of these cancer diagnoses tended to continue to hit our family over and over and over again, I couldn't help but wonder how nutrition could play a role in the three different places of cancer in terms of prevention or helping during the course of treatment, and then also helping in survivorship. And so while I was going through college, finishing up my degree in business, I was so like into nutrition, and I kind of thought that things were too late and that I missed the boat on going to dietetic school. Here I am, a 21-year-old kid, and thinking it's too late. And it was actually my now husband, who I was dating in college, who was my biggest advocate for going back to school to become a dietitian. And he kept saying, like, Alison, you love nutrition. You like always are reading about it. You're always diving into it. This is something that I really think you should consider doing. And so with his encouragement, I ended up looking into a university locally that had a dietetics program, and I enrolled pretty fast. And when I enrolled there, I told all the professors and my mentors and everything that I wanted to be an oncology dietitian. And the reason why I shared that is because I was so incredibly passionate about learning about that aspect of nutrition. And the reason I also said it was because there's very little nutrition education in oncology for really anybody, but especially even dietitians. In undergrad, we had 1 hour lecture on oncology nutrition, and that was it. And so I sought every opportunity that I could to learn more about oncology nutrition. And I was really grateful for the oncology dietitians that let me shadow them, learn from them. And also I got a internship as a dietitian, a dietetic internship to work at one of the well-known national cancer centers. They ended up hiring me on full time after college, and that's where my career as an oncology dietitian started. Now, inside of this, what ended up happening is I ended up moving home after that, working there, and was hired on to start, grow, and run an oncology nutrition program at the cancer center that my mom was treated at when she was going through breast cancer. And I was really thrilled to be back at home, but I was also very nervous to be a brand new dietitian, essentially running and growing this oncology nutrition program. But I continued to find, so much fulfillment by being there, and just a deeper desire to help my patients. And it was actually about this time around here that I had been working at that cancer center. This was pre-kids, and my husband and I were married. And during that time, I ended up actually kind of starting this own little side business of Wholesome LLC, which I currently run today. And it was because it was out of passion project, and more people were coming to me in the area asking me to work with them as they encountered cancer and wanted the nutrition aspect of it. But I couldn't work with them at the cancer center that I was working at because we could only see patients who were getting treated at that cancer center. So anyways, it kind of started because my husband was working a lot. I'm like, I'll just do this. And it was about that time that I actually started learning more about the plant-based diet. And I really kind of truly stumbled upon it. And what happened is one of my grandmother's friends had given me a book that was all about plant-based nutrition. And I had never even really considered plant-based nutrition before. So to answer your question about that is that I was actually already a dietitian. I was already an oncology dietitian, but I was not yet plant-based. And what happened is that, unfortunately, this was about 2015. My husband and I were facing infertility as we tried to start a family. And I do have PCOS, or polycystic ovarian syndrome, and which is one of the biggest causes of infertility in the US. And as we were about to move on to deeper and more intensive fertility treatment, I looked to my husband and I said, I think I want to try this plant-based nutrition thing a little bit deeper. And I had already started cutting out meat and reducing dairy. And I also live in Wisconsin. So it's like the beer, cheese, sausage capital of the world, right? So cutting dairy was pretty difficult to start. However, I still had, those things in my diet, but not as much as I had before. So anyways, I looked to him and I said, I don't need you to do it with me, but I would really like your support in pursuing a whole food plant-based diet just to see if it could help us and get pregnant. And so he, of course, was all in. And what ended up happening is I got pregnant very quickly afterwards. I hadn't ovulated in like a year and a half based on doing testing. And then I finally did. And wow, long story short, I have now two beautiful daughters. And I do feel that the plant-based diet really, truly played a huge role in helping me to start a family with my husband and raise some healthy children. So I do have more to my story here. You're also frozen on my screen, Chef AJ, so I want to make sure you're still there.
Okay, can you see me now?
Yes, now I can.
Okay,
perfect.
yeah, just let me know, because sometimes I just have to turn my camera on and off, but I could hear you, I could see you. And I want to just mention something about your fertility story. I'm not a doctor or a healthcare person, but I used to run these programs in my apartment in Sherman Oaks for many years called the Ultimate Weight Loss Program. And there was a lady in there, and she didn't have a lot of weight to lose, really. I don't know, maybe 10 pounds but a lot of people took the class because they had, they weren't eating as healthfully as they want, and they had food addictions. And she was in her 40s, and she went through the program, and she had been trying to get pregnant like forever, but she wasn't there for that. And then just cleaning up her diet from kind of more of a junk food vegan diet to like a really healthy one, she got pregnant. I mean, I couldn't believe that.
It's amazing. And I do think that, there are all sorts of reasons and unknown reasons too, why someone might face an infertility diagnosis. And we knew mine was related to PCOS and the inability to ovulate on my own and so forth. And so, and to, how you're looking at me today, actually, like I've never been overweight. This has kind of always been my stature. I've always been a healthy weight, athletic, right? So and I didn't have the classic symptoms or side effects of PCOS, right? I'm slender, but what I did experience was a lot of bad acne and those types of things. And as soon as I really cleaned up my diet to be plant-based is when my face cleared up, and so many other great benefits started happening. And then of course, which our end goal at that time was to get pregnant, and we were able to have a really healthy baby. And so what ended up happening from there is, I ended up continuing to work at the cancer center as an outpatient oncology dietitian, and just loved exactly what I was doing. And I ended up starting to work part-time in that position, truly because I had a daughter and I kind of had my heart pulling me to stay home a little bit. And so I actually left that oncology practice at the end of 2018 and decided to pursue wholesome LLC exclusively. And now that's where my career, I like to say, took in a really ironic twist. And that was when in May of 2022, I was diagnosed initially with DCIS with microinvasion, which is, some people consider it stage 0 breast cancer. And DCIS means that it has still been contained to the milk duct. And really what happened is it was 10 days after finishing breastfeeding from my second child that I just happened to have my annual wellness exam with my OBGYN, and did a breast exam, and she found a lump. And I honestly was not regularly doing my breast exams, even though I have a huge family history of breast cancer and other cancers. And it was something I was definitely neglecting. And although I made this my excuse was that, oh, I don't have regular periods. I don't have regular cycles because I have PCOS. So there's no real good time to do a breast exam anyways, because they do say the certain part in your cycle is the best time to do a breast exam. So anyways, that was my excuse for just not doing them, right? And actually, during that appointment, my OBGYN and I, we didn't really do anything about the lump that we found. She noted it, she said something about it, but we kind of chalked it up to breastfeeding and finishing breastfeeding and how much the breast can change during that time. And perhaps it's just a clogged milk duct and so forth. And we kind of left it at that, to be honest. And I went home and I felt the lump, and I wanted to make sure that I could continue to look at it, knowing my family history, the people that I've worked with as an oncology dietitian, and ended up, a couple of weeks later, every time I felt that lump, I got really anxious. And I wanted to get it checked out. I did have a lump between my pregnancies that I had ultrasounded that ended up going away. But this one didn't go away. And so I finally reached back out to my doctor. And I said, I just really want to make sure that this is nothing and I need some peace of mind. Can we get this checked out? And actually, what prompted that was that I was getting ready to be a speaker at the Plant-Based Nutrition Prevention Plant PPOD, which is a lifestyle medicine plant-based conference. And I was going to be speaking on breast cancer nutrition. I was like, I just need some peace of mind before I go stand on a stage and talk about breast cancer nutrition. And what ended up happening is I got an ultrasound. The ultrasound led immediately to a mammogram, which immediately led to a biopsy and then a diagnosis. And before I even went in to the biopsy, the radiologist said, we're pretty confident we know what we're looking at. We're pretty confident that it's breast cancer. We just need to confirm it with a biopsy. So I got that biopsy results 48 hours later, diagnosed with breast cancer, which again was originally the diagnosis was DCIS with microinvasion. Hopped a plane the next day, presented on the stage about breast cancer nutrition, and then came back. And then on that Monday, right after, I met with my breast surgeon, and I kind of walked in thinking that maybe I was going to have a lumpectomy and maybe some radiation. I didn't know, right? Like I didn't know what was before me. And that surgeon actually ended up saying that she didn't think that I actually had DCIS. She was concerned that it was more. So I'll just kind of speed the story up from the standpoint is, during that time, that is when we ran genetics and found that I do carry a genetic mutation. And so does my mom, so do my siblings. The genetic mutation kind of makes a little bit more sense when it comes to, all the family diagnoses. So I decided to have a double mastectomy with a deep flap reconstruction. And coming out of that surgery, the surgical pathology actually changed in that I no longer had the diagnosis of DCIS with microinvasion, but actually with invasive ductal carcinoma. And because I tested what's called triple positive, so I had 3 different receptors, is actually that then I was recommended to have chemotherapy and targeted therapy. And so I had 3 months of chemotherapy, another 9 months of targeted therapy, 2 more surgeries, and here I am today as what I would consider myself a cancer survivor and a cancer thriver. And I completed my treatments in August of 2023. And I actually just had my last surgery in September of this year.
So completed cancer treatment about a year and a half ago. Would that be about right?
Yep, about a year and a half ago.
Okay. So can I ask how old you are, or is...
Yes, of course. I was diagnosed at 33 and I'm now 36.
Wow, you're young. You're young. So here was the order. So first you went to dietetic school, then you became plant-based or vegan, then you got cancer. It's funny how now they're all working together for good, aren't they?
Yeah. And that's there's a lot of emotion and thoughts and everything that there has been incredible good that has come out of my diagnosis, and a lot of really positive life changes actually as a result, knowing that like I can't keep living the way that I was living. And that isn't necessarily related to my diet at all. That is related to the stress that I carry and lots of other I'm a high achieving type A perfectionist. And so that's been a lot of the work that I've been working on since my diagnosis too.
I'm wondering, is there ever any link between infertility and cancer?
Well, I will say that when so some of the treatments that I had been in for infertility, I didn't have IVF, but I did end up having IUI. And during that time, I had to take some medications to actually like prompt me to ovulate. And there is some possible connection. So when I met with the oncologist that works in the genetic mutation area, his words that it was probable that my infertility treatments could have played a role. And that was, I mean, we know, right? My breast cancer was hormonally positive. I was taking hormones to help me get pregnant. I have PCOS, which is a hormonal imbalance, right? So the cons, in my opinion, my like not even my dietitian opinion, my personal opinion is that, and the stress that I carry were big, huge drivers, and having a genetic mutation, like it was almost just like the perfect catalyst for that storm.
Yeah, because I never thought about it until this show, but I had tons of infertility treatments, and tons of rounds of IVF. And I remember all those shots. And I mean, I don't know, my cancer's different, but you think back about everything you've ever done. You seem to have such a great attitude. Was it always like this, or you didn't freak out at all?
Oh gosh, I mean, there was tears upon tears. I mean, so many, just fear, right? And I think that's fear is probably one of the biggest words that would describe cancer altogether, if you ask me, is the fear of the unknown, the fear of how am I going to tolerate treatment, the fear of is this going to work, is it not going to work. When I was diagnosed, I had a 14-year-old child and 14-month-old child and a 4-year-old, right? Like it just everything was flashing through my mind about being here as long as possible so that my kids could have a mother, right? So yeah, I mean, I am often talked about, people say to me, and like how I have a good, mindset around having cancer and going through everything, but that doesn't neglect the fact that I have had hard days. I have had really hard moments where I'm angry and frustrated and all those things. However, I think those are valid and warranted, and I actually encourage that in some respects. But it's a matter, in my opinion, of how long do you sit in that, and do you use that to fuel you to move forward? And that's exactly what I've done, is like kind of the idea of like, okay, cancer, like, okay, here you are, but it's my turn, and taking that control back.
Yeah, I feel like the mindset is, well, I can't speak for everybody, but for me, the most important piece. If I can manage my mind, I can manage everything. But there are some days, and those aren't the days I'm going live.
Yeah, absolutely. I can totally relate to that. Yeah, there are days where I've kind of hid out in my bedroom and was like, okay, and sometimes it's just giving myself the grace and like allowing myself to do that for a short period of time, right? And I think that's okay. That's part of me like moving through the grief of it, the grief of wanting more children and now I cannot because of cancer, right? Or the grief of the loss of my breasts, right? That's not something that I ever thought that would bother me, but it changes, I mean, your body completely. So there's a lot of grief and there's a lot of anger and there's a lot of fear that comes from it. But I also do have a lot of empowerment in it.
So did you do everything in the standard of care? Like, did you have the first surgery and then they often follow it with chemo and radiation? Did you do all of it?
Yes, I did do all of it. So because I tested triple positive for breast cancer, which means I had all three different receptors, estrogen, progesterone, and HER2 positive. HER2 positive breast cancer used to be a very highly recurrent cancer until they came out with the drug of Herceptin, which is a targeted therapy. And now the recurrence risk of HER2 positive cancer after Herceptin is much, much, much lower. So I did move forward with chemotherapy, targeted therapy, and then I was recommended to do endocrine therapy, which was tamoxifen for me. I did that for about a year and a half and ended up stopping that therapy related to quality of life issues. And that was something that actually kind of happened in the last few months and took me a long time to decide what was right for me. So I would say that's the only piece of recommendation that I haven't followed through on, is continuing that therapy. They wanted it for 10 years and I only did it for a year and a half.
Yeah, well, quality of life. What was the order in like, walk me through the time frame? Like you had the surgery and then how soon did you do the next and then the next?
So I had the double mastectomy and deep flap. I had immediate reconstruction. So that was in July of 2022. I started chemotherapy and targeted therapy at the end of August 2022. So it was about 6 weeks later. I had 3 months of chemotherapy with targeted therapy together. So I had weekly chemo for 3 months. And then after that, I went to targeted therapy only, which was every 3 weeks for another 9 months, making a total of a year of treatment.
What is targeted therapy? The definition of that? What does that mean?
Yeah, so it's specifically targeted to treat the HER2 positive receptor cancer. And so that is, I mean, it's also like kind of using your immune system. So it's kind of to help attack against those cells, right? So it's targeted to those with HER2 positive, right? So somebody who isn't HER2 positive would not undergo that treatment. So I finished the infusions in August of 23. I had a revision of my breast reconstruction in October of 23. And then I had a hysterectomy and another breast revision in September of 24. So just a few months ago.
Oh, you've been through a lot.
It's been I honestly can say, like, reflecting on it, I really don't feel like I was able to like take a deep breath and feel that like the active treatment was behind me until like a few weeks ago, like a month ago, after I had my last meeting with my oncologist, decided not to continue with the endocrine therapy. And now I feel like I'm kind of like truly moving into like the full survivorship mode.
Wow. Wow. Well, congratulations. So you didn't have radiation then?
I did not. So my lymph nodes in surgery, they tested the sentinel lymph node, or the closest lymph node, and that tested negative in surgery, which means that I did not move forward with radiation. And if that had tested positive, they would have stopped the reconstruction during that surgery. I wouldn't have been able to get reconstruction right away, but I did end up getting reconstruction.
Wow. Wow. Were the surgeries very painful?
Well, do you know what a deep flap surgery is by any chance?
No, I don't, but it doesn't sound like it sounds like it hurt.
So what it is, so I had both of my breasts removed, and then my breasts were recreated with my own tissue.
Oh my
So
God.
I have a scar from one hip all the way across to the other. So a lot of people that I've met, I have not had any C-sections, but a lot of people have told me, so like a C-section scar might be like this. My deep flap incision is from hip to hip. So essentially they take that tissue and recreate the breast, and it's about a 10-hour surgery, and it's a 3-month recovery. And honestly, the first 2 weeks were incredibly difficult. Like, I couldn't bathe myself, I couldn't get up in a chair on my own, all those things. And I will say probably the hardest part about that entire surgery was that I wasn't able to like hold my baby. I wasn't able to pick up my kids or anything like that for quite a long time. And I will never forget the moment that I picked up my 4-year-old again after surgery. It was about 15 weeks after surgery, and she just looked at me and she goes, "Mom, you just picked me up for the first time in a really long time," And so I honestly think, for me personally, parenting through all of it has been the hardest part.
Oh gosh, I'm sorry what you went through. I feel like anybody that goes through cancer treatment or has cancer should get a medal. I mean, it's extraordinary, the stories that I'm hearing from people. Wow. So I guess it's different maybe because when you have kids, you kind of have to kind of keep it together a little bit, don't you? A little bit differently than, you know.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing that I've navigated a lot, is really truly like, how much do I keep it together? How much do I also show my daughters that what mom's doing is a really hard thing and she can do it, right? Just to show them the resilience, right? And I haven't hidden like all my hardships or anything like that from them. But I say that parenting is the hardest, but also the best thing for cancer for me, because it forced me to get out of bed in the morning. I had to get my daughter to school. There was no other option to get her to school other than me, right? So even on the days where you feel like you want to crawl up into a ball and, you just had chemo the next day, I was still walking my daughter to school every day. So, and I think so that part was hard, but it also pulled me through, and I'm thankful for that.
Wow. So you probably didn't have the luxury to just freak out like I do.
I mean, I had my freak out moments. Don't get me wrong. Please don't get me wrong.
But
But
it sounds like it sounds like it helped. Your husband was very supportive, I'm guessing.
100%. I mean, well, we even talk about, though, at some point it was almost like he was a single dad, right? Working full time, taking care of the kids. And he's like, I didn't have two kids. I had essentially three because he was also taking care of me. So gosh, God bless that man and everything that he continues to do for my health and the kids and everything. Yeah, super supportive. I couldn't imagine not having him.
Well, did you raise your kids plant-based?
My kids are plant-based. Yes.
Nice. Oh, that'd be a great story on your own. We'd love to know how you did that and what you feed them. If there's time, I'd love to hear that as well. But I'd love to know a little bit too. And again, I know you have some pictures you can show them or not, but I think people sometimes like to see pictures if you have them. Did you change your diet at all once you were diagnosed with cancer? And is there a best diet for cancer, prevention and recurrence, and of course going through treatment? Because I mentioned to you before we logged on, I start my treatment February 6th. I'm going to be doing immunotherapy with Keytruda. And like they gave me, it's like, so I don't like to take medicine at all. This is why part of this is so hard for me. But right away, they gave me two prescriptions, and these are both anti-nausea medicines. One is, I don't know the names, but
Probably on Dancitron
yeah,
and
prochlorperazine and ondansetron. Anyway, and so basically it's like assuming I'm going to get nauseous. And I thought immunotherapy would be like just like a little like kind of walk in the park, but apparently maybe it's not as strong as chemo, but apparently there can be side effects. And it's like, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, if I'm nauseous, I'm not gonna be able to eat, and they don't want me to lose any more weight. So what do you eat when you have cancer? And what do you eat to prevent it? And,
yeah.
I'd love to know your thoughts. And what did you eat?
Absolutely. All great questions. Well, I'll start actually by sharing a few pictures just so you can kind of get an idea of just where I was and all that kind of stuff. And so I'll share my screen here. Can you see it okay?
Perfect.
So this is one of the things that I usually start with. This is, all the people in my life that were diagnosed with cancer prior to me, and they're all family members. This is my grandfather who passed away from liver cancer. My grandmother that had she had breast and uterine. My grandmother passed from lung cancer. My mother breast and thyroid cancer. My godmother breast cancer. So these are all the people that have like really positively influenced actually my oncology career. And now I will show you two these. So this is a picture of me and my daughter. And I actually had, the reason I took this picture, this was actually our last breastfeeding session. And I did this for both of my daughters. And this was really important to me because I didn't know if I was going to be able to nurse another child again. I wanted more kids. And never in a million years would I have thought that the reason that I would never breastfeed a child again would be because of breast cancer. I thought it was going to be because of infertility, right? The trouble that we had to get pregnant, and so it was 10 days later that we found the lump in my annual exam. So, I just imagine exactly how I was sitting down thinking about this. I just could never imagine that that was the turn that my life was going to take right after this. So this is a picture of me after my double mastectomy with deep flap reconstruction. So I spent 3 days in the hospital after this because it's incredibly painful because you have, the number of incisions that I have across my chest and my abdomen, you would never believe. But I had 6 drains, and I was hooked up to a device that was always constantly looking at the oxygen delivery to the new breast tissue, et cetera. And then I ended up going home and I think this skipped over a couple, but this is a picture of me during chemotherapy, and I used cold capping to save my hair. I had really tremendous success with this.
Well, your hair is gorgeous. I mean, like I could see it right now. It's beautiful.
Thank you. Yes, I'm about a little over 2 years out of chemotherapy. So like you can tell, like I had very good success. I probably lost about 15% of my hair. And what has grown back actually gray. I call it like my gray highlight and everything. So, but I did have tremendous success with cold capping. So this is a picture of me finishing chemo and cold capping. And then I continued infusions for another 9 months, as I mentioned. We can get to this too. This is my next slide, but it's from the standpoint of, it says, what is one thing you wish more people understood? And that thing is easy for me. It's that I wish more people were informed about the role nutrition play that can help patients during the course of treatment and into survivorship. And that nutrition can play a role in helping the reduce of cancer development. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen there and answer your questions, because that's exactly what you asked, right?
You were smiling after that surgery. I can't imagine the amount of pain you were in. Hopefully you were on pain medicine, hopefully.
Well, so that surgery, I had an epidural after following the surgery. And that's because of the pain in the abdomen and so forth. So I was on the epidural for like 2-ish days. So I couldn't leave the hospital until I weaned off the epidural. And actually had really well pain control. I didn't end up going home taking any other pain medications. I walked to my follow-up appointment 2 weeks later at the hospital, not very far from our house, but my breast surgeon, she did say, don't tell anybody else that you walked here, because you're going to make this surgery look too easy. And the reason I share that is not to make it seem like it was easy, but is kind of leading into the point of, a lot of people have asked me, and don't get me wrong, I asked myself this, and maybe you have as well, Chef AJ, is that, okay, if I was eating plant-based, if I was a healthy weight, if I was being physically active, all these things that I'm supposed to do, and I still got cancer, what's the point? What's the point? Right? And for me, it was really the realization that the things that I was doing with my diet and my lifestyle and all the things that I was supposed to do were going to be the things that were going to get me through treatment and be successful. Right? So when I talk about the reason of being able to walk to the hospital 2 weeks after my DIEP flap surgery, is that I really believe my lifestyle allowed me to do that. It allowed me to heal appropriately. It allowed me to be strong, right? And do these things. Now, keep in mind, yes, I was 33, so I had, age on my side from that perspective, but I couldn't imagine going through treatment without the nutrition support that I had. And I feel very lucky to have had that nutrition support, because that nutrition support was really, truly everything that I was teaching my patients over the years to help them get through treatment. So when it comes to the role nutrition can play that can help during the course of treatment, is a lot of people will say, well, I already have cancer. Should I really be focused on eating a plant-based diet still? Absolutely. Right. And when it comes to research, now there is not research that shows that, this particular diet or this particular food is going to prevent cancer by any means. There's no guarantee in anything, right? Cancer is multifactorial, and there are lots of different factors at play. Our diet is a factor, but there's other factors too, right? And so with that being said, we want to focus on plant-based foods and whole plant-based foods as much as possible, because these foods contain the phytochemicals or the phytonutrients. And these phytonutrients have been researched to show benefits to help have anti-cancer properties, anti-inflammatory based properties. And these are the things that are going to help during the course of treatment, right? So, and this is not necessarily the case for everybody, because there are some people that are more prone to nausea than others. But for example, I was prescribed those same medications and never used them through chemo, right? And I simply used nutrition and ginger and peppermint to help get me through it without having to take those medications, right? And I'm not saying for people that are going through it not to take those medications, but the thing that I love about nutrition and the support that it can provide is that it may be able to lessen the need for medications like that. And don't get me wrong, I'm just like you, Chef AJ, in that I do not like taking medications. My husband is a pharmacist. Okay. So you can imagine, right? And I'm the person that does not like taking it either. And I do believe there is absolutely a time and place for medications. Absolutely. I chose conventional recommended therapy. That was my choice. I do believe in that. However, I believe in the power of complementing those therapies with the best foundational whole person health that we have. Like, could we imagine a world where we combine the best we have of conventional Western medicine and the best we have of nutrition, physical activity, and alternative medicines, right? Like, what if we combined those two? What a powerful force it could be, right? So that's where I really look at nutrition. So is there a best diet to follow? Well, the current evidence reflects a plant predominant diet. Now, there are some diets, some research studies here and there, but they're not conclusive that does 100% whole food, plant-based, vegan diet reduce our risk of cancer even more so. There are some studies that have shown yes, there are some studies that have shown no, but what we really know is that the more plants in the diet, the more whole plants in the diet, the better the reduction of risk and during the course of treatment. And it's been interesting too, because during my time as an oncology dietitian and working with other dietitians, we talk to each other all the time. And I'd be like, this patient is doing this, and their side effects are like almost non-existent. And they'd be like, mine too. And it was always collecting the data, really truly the empirical data of that. Like, the more plants people are eating, the more whole food plants they are doing, the more physically active they are, the better they are doing through treatment. The more they are able to maintain their lean body mass, which is incredibly important during the course of treatment. So we do have research that shows that working with a dietitian and nutrition intervention during treatment can help reduce hospitalizations, improve how well treatments can work, reduce delays in treatment, which is really important, reduce the side effects, improve our overall body composition. I mean, the benefits are endless. However, not a lot of people have access to that because not a lot of cancer centers or medical teams and whatnot are providing nutrition education during the course of treatment that can be helpful. It's one of those things that is kind of pushed off to the side and sometimes poo-pooed in terms of playing no role, but we do know that it plays a role. So overall, to answer your question, yes, research has shown that a plant predominant diet in fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes is the best diet that we can follow to help reduce our risk of recurrence or cancer in general. And when it came to my own diet, I'm still plant-based. People ask me all that time, like, are you going to start eating meat now? And then actually, no. But there were things that I did hone in on a lot more with my diet. And that was definitely the cruciferous vegetables, even more, the broccoli sprouts, the berries, some of these foods that, although there isn't one end all be all, as much as we wish there was, eating some of these top cancer fighting foods has really been my approach since diagnosed with cancer. And then also making sure, keeping in mind that, again, it's not just nutrition, it's the whole person health, right? So the American College of Lifestyle Medicine looks at 6 different pillars: nutrition, physical activity, sleep, stress reduction, avoidance of risky substances, and social interaction. These are the 6 components of whole person health and lifestyle medicine. And in my opinion, that is truly where like overall healthcare should be.
Wow. Thank you. I'd love to know what you eat. People love to know what our guests eat in a day, maybe what you eat now in a day, what you ate during cancer treatment, maybe what you ate before. Because I'm imagining you, as a dietitian, you probably ate a very healthy version of the plant-based diet.
Yeah, it definitely wasn't perfect and still isn't. I would never consider myself to have a perfect diet. I always remind people that I'm human as well, right? However, now I guess what a particular diet looks like for me is my favorite way to start the day is with oatmeal, loaded with berries, flaxseed, and I use soy milk to make the oatmeal. That's one of my favorite breakfasts. For lunch, kind of varies. I do tend to really like leftovers for lunch. But so for example, last night we had a tofu stir fry essentially over rice. And that was my lunch today before hopping on this call. And for example, for dinner tonight, actually before this call as well, I was prepping some soup that was a kale and white bean soup. I'll have some fruit on the side and probably a salad. But gosh, it can range so much. But I'm a huge believer in making sure that we get plenty of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes. And the way that I really think about my plate and the way that I often like coach my clients about their plate is always making sure that they have all 4 of those components if possible: a fruit, a non-starchy vegetable, a whole grain or starchy vegetable and legumes of some sort. So I would say that is really my mindset and how I make sure that I am eating a well-rounded plant-based diet.
Fantastic. And I imagine the family eats pretty similarly.
Yeah, I mean, I will tell you that my children are children, right? I would love for them to eat more vegetables, right? But here's the thing that we're constantly competing against, as is pretty much every other American, is that when they go to school, right? There is other influence from school, whether it be the goldfish crackers or whatever the treats might be in at school. And it's really interesting. So the approach that we have as parents is truly that at home we eat plant-based, and those are the options. When they go to school, if they're provided a snack or because we always pack their snack and their lunch every day. They never have hot lunch. They don't even ever have interest in hot lunch. We've asked them before. But if there's, for example, there's a birthday in the class and they bring a treat, for example, we empower our kids to be able to make a choice. And so typically what we hear the teachers say that they do is they ask if it's vegan or not. And then the teacher often doesn't know, right? And then they decide whether they're going to have the cupcake or the treat or whatever it might be. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. And we really just try to empower them by teaching them what food can do for us and how it makes us feel, and try to encourage them to have that self-awareness and how food makes them feel. And so that's how we really navigate it. So we are really big advocates of not making two different meals for mom and dad and the kids. Sometimes, usually what it ends up being sometimes is that we're making the same meal, but different component of it end up on their plate separated, where it all ends in like one big thing on our plate. So for example, if we're having the soup tonight, right, we have the white beans and the veggies, right? Those are probably separated on their plate rather than in a soup, if that makes sense.
Great. Thank you. We got a lot of questions from some of the live viewers, so let's jump into them. Let's see. Here we go. Thank you, Jesse, for your perfect printing so I can read them easily. Colleen, hi, Colleen, and she would like to know, do you think that fasting the day before and after treatment is long enough? And I'm guessing she's talking about chemotherapy, but I would ask the same thing for immunotherapy too.
That's a really great question. And I actually did fast for chemotherapy. So there is research that is continuing to grow in the area of fasting for chemotherapy, in the role that it potentially plays to help reduce the side effect risk, and also potentially improve the efficacy or how well chemotherapy treatments can work against cancer cells. I will say that we see the biggest benefit in the area of improving side effects. So I had chemotherapy every single week. So the research does range in terms of how many hours are recommended of fasting before a chemotherapy and how many hours after a chemotherapy. As a dietitian, if a patient of mine is interested in fasting for chemotherapy, I think the important thing to know is that not everybody is appropriate for fasting for chemotherapy. It can be done in a harmful way, so we have to be cautious of that. We want to make sure somebody is already is adequately nourished, they have good body composition, etc., and they can withstand a fast if they're going to do it. However, the research does show, which is one of the biggest reasons why a lot of people don't like the idea of fasting, is that it might lead to further weight loss. And we do know that weight maintenance and being able to maintain our lean body mass during the course of treatment is actually very incredibly beneficial and important for us to tolerate treatment. However, the fasting studies right now are showing that there is no increased risk of weight loss during fasting. And really, truly, what that looks like is that the calorie consumption needs to be made up outside of those windows of fasting. So in terms of how long somebody should fast prior to their chemotherapy is truly dependent on the chemotherapy regimen, and also how frequently they're getting that chemotherapy regimen, right? So for somebody who fasted every single week, I had actually helped patients fast during chemotherapy prior to my own chemotherapy, but I had never coached anybody that was doing it every single week, right? So I had to modify that fasting and what that looked like. But do I believe that fasting can play a beneficial role? Yes. I personally never did, and I had 12 cycles of chemotherapy and I never didn't fast for them. So I always fasted. So I don't know what it was like to not fast for chemotherapy. I did the whole
So
time.
did you fast just the day before, the day of, and the day after?
I did, yes, but I had to. So I would say that for my chemotherapy, I ended up my fast ranged from like 55 hours to 65 hours, depending on the day when I got chemotherapy, all the different things. So it did end up being before, the day of, and day after, with like time stamps being a little bit here or there, depending on the day and even the treatment cycle.
Yes, I want to do that. I see a True North Health doctor every 2 weeks, virtually, and I'll ask him that because I've never made it longer than 3 days on a water fast, and I've done this under medical supervision at True North. What happens is either I vomit or my blood sugar gets to about 40. So I really want to do it, and because I
And
feel like that would be the best because that's what I'm hearing.
And that's why I'm actually glad you say that. Those side effects is that it should be done under medical supervision.
Yeah, I mean, I would
Yeah,
definitely.
you would. And I definitely want the viewers to know too, is
Yes.
that, like, they definitely want to run it by their oncology team. They need to be under medical supervision because of reasons that you have mentioned. Now, I would definitely ask your physician about that. We haven't seen the data, or at least I haven't seen the data for immunotherapy. The data is really, truly there for chemotherapy, in my opinion. So when I transitioned to targeted therapy, I did not continue to fast like I did for chemotherapy.
And it was just water. I wonder what, like, is there a most important, if you're going to fast, is it the day of that's the most important, the day before, the day after? Because, fasting 1 day is nothing.
I So from my understanding of the research, the most important would be prior to, but also that 24 hours after is also incredibly important
Oh
too. And it's
man.
really because, so essentially the theory of it and the understanding is that because you're in starvation mode, right? Like your body is not getting energy, your healthy cells go into this preservation mode or this protection mode, where cancer cells cannot go into protection mode. Like their only desire is to replicate and divide, right? So that's the theory of as to why it can improve the efficacy of treatment and attack cancer cells and protect healthy cells.
If the doctor says it's okay, I'm gonna do it because I feel like I'm more like when I've been to True North twice. I've been to True North 15 times. I used to work there, but I never fasted until I got diagnosed with cancer. And I attempted to water fast. They wanted me to do 10 days and I made it like 3 or 4 and then we went to broth. But I feel like I'm more motivated now, like just doing it theoretically, like, is this gonna help? But like what you're saying to me, if this could make the treatment more effective, then I'm more motivated to just do it even when it's unpleasant. It's not that unpleasant. It's just, you just don't, for me, I just never have any energy when I fast. I see these people that are walking around, oh, I'm on day 42, and I'm like, really? I'm like, it's been 4 hours and I want to go to bed,
Yeah. Yeah. And I will say it was not easy. Like I look back and how I did that every week for 12 weeks, like it feels insane. Right. And I will say that I've tried to kind of implement I mean, I do kind of like intermittent, like overnight, right? 13-hour fast every day. Like our bodies are designed to do that. But like the long-term fast, they're so much harder when you don't have the motivation of chemotherapy, if you
Right,
ask me, from my
right.
perspective. And I would always just constantly remind myself of the research and the data and why I was doing it. And that was really what propelled me forward. And I will honestly say, so I had chemo on Thursday. By Friday, so I was on my third day, right? I felt awesome. I felt great. And I don't know if it was placebo because I knew I was going to be breaking my fast later that afternoon, or if because I really did feel great. But I will say, yeah, Friday, I didn't sleep great at night because you get steroids in your pre-meds, right? But Friday I'd wake up and I would work the day after chemo because I felt great. So it was really kind of the weekend where it kind of hit a little bit more.
I'm thinking you're not the typical cancer patient somehow.
Well, I think my personality is probably not the typical cancer patient. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, and
yeah.
that's the thing is like many people had no idea that I had cancer, right? The
Yeah.
number of times that I heard people say, like, wait, what? Like, you have cancer? You don't look anything like. And that can also be really challenging because how you feel on the inside, mentally, emotionally, and physically, doesn't reflect how you look on the outside,
Yeah.
right? That was actually one of the downfalls of cold capping, is that I didn't look any different, right? that people had the same expectations of me, even though I was going through all of this.
Yeah. Do you know anything about immunotherapy? Is hair loss a risk for that? Because I'm losing my hair anyway, and it's not because of cancer, it's because of stress.
Yeah, it depends on the immunotherapy. However, many immunotherapies don't cause hair loss.
No. Well,
And not even all chemotherapies cause hair loss. Only a handful of them do.
well, I got my wigs. I'm all ready if I do. I'm not, that is like the least of my worries, if I lose my hair. So yeah, I feel like those two fasts at True North prepared me for now why I really might have to fast for 3 days. So it was not in vain. There's a viewer on Instagram named Jocelyn wanting to know if you took any vitamins or supplements during all your process.
I did take some and I still do. And now even as a professional, as a dietitian, my approach to supplements is very individualized. And oftentimes that supplemental approach is informed by deficiencies and so forth. Now, I will say there are also oncologists who absolutely do not want you to take a single supplement at all. And the concerns are valid from the standpoint of, because not all the supplements have been tested, right? They don't have FDA regulation. And there's very little research in terms of how a supplement may impact your treatment that you're undergoing, because there's very little data, and there probably never will be a lot of data on that. So I did take a few, and they were all run through my oncologist and made sure that they were okay. But I will say some oncologists are like, absolutely not, you're not taking anything. So I was, personally, I was taking some omega-3s, vitamin D, and then also a supplement that I take for my PCOS, which is called inositol. But it should definitely be run by your oncologist and maybe even an oncology pharmacist to help make sure that there's no interactions with your medications.
Great. People are asking how to contact you, and I can't put the show notes in until the show has started. It's just the way the system that I use works, but I'm going to get that in very, very soon, Colleen and others, before the show ends. I promise you, because I know you gave me that information. And so people can contact Alison if they want to work with her. And I have another question from Rachel. Hi, Rachel. What was it like for you, Alison, as a healthcare professional, being on the other side of the bed, basically being a patient? Great question.
That's an excellent question. Now, there's an interesting part of my story, and that is where I was treated for my cancer was the same place that I worked for my cancer. So I knew 85% of the staff. My oncologist was previously my colleague, as was my surgeon, and my breast navigator is a friend of mine, right? And so I actually found the most challenging part of my journey as a dietitian and as the patient is that when I walked into that cancer center, that actually happened to be the same cancer center that I worked at just a couple of years prior, is I felt that I had a hard time letting my guard down, and that the challenges that I was experiencing, I felt like I needed to like have a suit of armor on and be the brave professional that wasn't struggling on the inside. So I will say that was actually one of my most difficult parts, is being able to be vulnerable to my oncologist and my medical team when things weren't going well, and being able to tell them like, hey, like I'm not tolerating this right now, or I need some extra support in this area, and kind of admitting that you're like, I can't do this alone, right? So I would say that it was one of the most difficult things for me in being the patient rather than the professional. And I think sometimes the other part of it would say is that there was a time during treatment, this was actually after chemotherapy, while I was still on targeted therapy, that I was having a really hard time eating. I was struggling to eat because my appetite was poor. I was having GI difficulties. And I remember turning to my husband and saying, like, I know the importance of eating. I know exactly what I need to be doing right now, but I'm telling you that I'm struggling with it. And so we ended up working together. So it was essentially me relaying my professional information to him and making him be my coach back, right? And so what we pretty much had said, that I said, if you put the food in front of me, I promise you I will try to eat it, right? Whereas if I have to put the time, the energy, the emotion into picking what what I should eat, cooking it, putting in front of me, doing all of that, then I was not going to lead to me eating as much. So it had to be me like stepping out of that professional role and being the patient was difficult. But I think it was helpful when I was able to have my husband essentially be the person that drove me to that, even though I was having to teach him how to drive me essentially. So I would say there's definitely challenges, but I will say now, post treatment, post surgery, all these things, I have although I do believe I was an effective, good oncology dietitian before having cancer, I do believe that having cancer and having gone through it has taken my ability to work with patients to a whole new level, because I can relate to them in an entirely different way than I could before. I can validate and empathize with them, and also say like, I struggled with that too. And that can be something that's been really helpful. And I have a lot of patients that tell me that they do choose to work with me, not only because of my professional experience and expertise, and hopefully the way that I coach and stuff like that, but also because I've been through cancer myself, and that it brings a whole new level to my work.
Did you have a mentor or anything? Because I've been getting, I mean, there's all these organizations and they're all going to be on my show this month, like a Go To Lung Cancer tomorrow and Immerman's Angels, where they match you with a mentor or a buddy. Did you have anybody to help you or walk you through this, or were you kind of on your own?
That's a really good question. A little bit of both. Number one, I think again, because I worked at the cancer facility that I was treated at, I almost isolated myself from it, if that makes sense, because I felt like I needed to be in this professional capacity, but even though I wasn't. But I have had conversations with my husband before, because a lot of patients will come to me and they say, Alison, it's so awesome to be able to talk to you and bounce these ideas off of you. And I tell my husband, I'm like, that's great, but who is that for me? Right. So I feel like I'm still looking for that person, to be honest. However, I will say mentally, emotionally, I have been working with a counselor since the day of my diagnosis. I actually saw her this morning before I'm 2.5 years out, right? I still see her once a month, every 6 weeks. And that individual was through the cancer center that I worked at, but she did not work there when I was there. So it was a completely like neutral relationship. And I will say that has been incredibly instrumental in my journey. But I have not done support groups or anything. And I'll tell you why. I have a hard time separating that I'm an oncology dietitian, right? I have attended a program before where I did not share who I was or what I did, and they still knew who I was and what I did. So I couldn't escape that professional role and that patient role. So that has been difficult. And the other part is like support wise, I don't know what it's like to have cancer at a later age, at least at this point in my life, but it was very difficult to be the youngest patient in the room by a couple of decades when you're in the waiting room and you're 33 years old. And I felt like it was really hard for me to relate to many of the other patients that were in the room. And not that we don't have shared experiences, because we do, but I needed support as a mother who had cancer. And that was really hard to come by.
Well, you might have to start that then.
Yeah, right.
You have to start that group. Yeah, I agree. I mean, whatever works for people, but I feel like that they need to address, not they, I don't know who they is, but that people need to be aware of the resources available. And I'm trying to get them on the show, because that's where I suffered for the 2 years before I revealed my diagnosis, was with my mental health. And I had like I was seeing 4 different kinds of therapists, and I still see about 3 of them now. I guess so. A couple of them are going to be coming on the show. So yeah, that's yeah. Now that I think about it, actually, there is one person almost like you in one of my groups with breast cancer, much younger than the rest of us. And yeah, they mixed us all together. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have learned so many things from survivors that have gone before me in our years, but there is that little bit of like, when everybody else is at your age is more worried about school drop off and school pickup, and like those are the things that you like crave to be worried about when it's like the least of your worries anymore, right? And so just finding somebody that you can relate to, I do think that's incredibly important. And I do hope that anybody that's going through something has somebody, whether it be a counselor or a mentor or just a survivor that's going through it. And I will say, the day that I was going in for my biopsy, one of my friends from high school, I ran into her in the parking lot, and she that same week was diagnosed with cancer as well. She was diagnosed with a lymphoma, and we went through chemotherapy about the same timeline. And we did text throughout that. And that was really helpful to be able to have someone just to kind of vent to. And she's 2 years older than me, and she has like six children. So I remember texting her like, I have two and I don't know how I'm doing this with two, but how are you doing this with six? Right. So yeah, I think that's important.
Amazing. So there's a question from Julia. Have you ever had success getting oncology patients to do a whole food plant-based diet?
Oh, yes, absolutely. That's what they come to work with me on.
Okay,
So yes.
nice. Nice. Okay, there's a question, I think, some about holy basil, and this is from Victoria. Any thoughts on increased vitamin C intake and adaptogens like holy basil? I was told not to take any vitamin C going into cancer treatment. They said absolutely not. I don't know why I was told that, but that's what I was told.
Well, here's the thing about some of these in general, right? So vitamin C works as an antioxidant, right? So it sounds like a really incredible thing, and it may be. This is a very conflicting part in oncology. There are some people that are pro high dose infusion, like IV vitamin C, and there are some that are very against it. I will give you an example of that. We do know that there's some data, for example, in vitamin E, right? E is an Edward, that they actually studied that in lung cancer patients going through radiation when they were taking high doses of vitamin E in the supplemental form, not in food form, but in the supplemental form, it actually showed progression of their tumors, right? So we think it's a really awesome thing because it's vitamin E. It works as an antioxidant. It's a phytonutrient, but in its supplemental form, when it's removed from that whole food, it does different things, right? So the reason why we believe that whole plant-based foods are protective against cancer is because of how they work synergistically together with the fiber, the phytonutrients, all the different things inside of it, some that we have never even probably identified, and showing why it's beneficial. So I can't specifically talk to vitamin C or holy basil or anything like that. However, except for the vitamin C, it's very controversial. As a professional, I'm very whole food person first. And it doesn't mean that I'm against supplements. It's more so that it really needs to be individualized, because I could never know what one person's treatment is or what medications they're on and the potential interactions. And that's why like that individual attention is really necessary.
Great, thank you. Here's a question from, okay, well, it's not about cancer, but we'll take it anyway. Just kidding. Faith wants to know, I had an ostomy reversal and I'm missing much of my colon. Maybe she did have cancer, so I apologize. Any tips to better eat a whole food plant-based diet? Lots of beans and veggies can be painful.
Absolutely. And yes, with having a colostomy and everything, and even just a resection of the colon can definitely pose different challenges. And also it kind of depends like how much of the colon was removed, lots of different things. However, my general thought and approach would be to really focus on how much you're having of it and kind of slowly increasing. Because I think what happens a lot is we're very excited about doing a whole food plant-based diet, which is awesome, but our body has to get used to it as well. So when especially like our microbiome has to get used to having increased fiber and so forth. But when we have a smaller colon than typical, right, it's going to take even more adjustment and even more playing with. So is it possible to eat a whole food plant-based diet with a colon resection? Absolutely. But it has to be these very individualized approaches and like slow increases to including more legumes, more nuts and seeds and fruits and vegetables.
Great, thank you. Have you ever worked with people that have had gastric bypass? Because whenever I have taught weight loss programs, it's always been a challenge because we operate on the principles of calorie density, high volume, low calorie dense, high nutrient dense food, and they seem to have trouble, because their stomach is smaller.
I have very limited experience with gastric bypass. I've had a few cancer patients that have had a history of gastric bypass, like a long-term history, like a long time ago. But I don't ever claim to have an expertise in gastric bypass that would definitely be like a bariatric dietitian to be working with.
Great, thank you. There's a question from a viewer. Do you think that eating whole food plant-based helps lower the risk of cancers?
Absolutely, 100%. And I
Okay.
also think to myself too, from the standpoint of like, like kind of going back to that question of like, what's the point? Like, I still got cancer. Well, what if I hadn't been eating that way? What if I hadn't been exercising the way that I did? What if I hadn't been living the life the way that I did? Although it wasn't perfect, what would have happened? I don't know. Nobody can answer that, but that's my opinion.
Yeah, well, that's what I say when people say, well, how you know vegan 47 years? How did you get cancer? I'm like, well, you
Mhm.
know,
Yeah,
how
nobody is immune from cancer. I think there are some people that think that they are. And it's like, I might be just the very perfect example of that. Maybe you are just the very perfect example of that. Like, we're not immune, and that's where like my whole approach of like wholesome and the way that I practice is that it's about controlling the controllables. And those controllables, I can't control my genetic mutation. I have a higher increased risk of cancer than the average person walking down the street, regardless of my diet, right? But I can control my diet. I can control how much I exercise. I can work on controlling my mental health and improving that. I'm not immune to this disease and I'm not immune to recurrence either. However, I want to be able to say, hey, I did what I could, and that's what matters.
great, thank you. Can Allison talk about vitamin D and cancer and if or how it relates to eating whole food plant-based?
Yeah, so there is some research to show that there is an inverse relationship of vitamin D and cancer risk, more so when we're looking especially at breast cancer, colorectal cancer. And what I mean by an inverse relationship is meaning that the lower vitamin D is, the higher the risk, right? Or so when we see higher vitamin D, we see lower the risk of cancer. So that we do see this inverse relationship. Now, vitamin D is important for many different reasons. The biggest thing that comes to mind for people is our bone health, which it is important to, but it also is probably very important to our immune health and even our mental and emotional health. So when it comes to vitamin D, that is absolutely one of the nutrients that I recommend people having their levels drawn to know where they are, and also seeing if a supplement is appropriate. And that's because there is no real reliable food of vitamin D unless it's been fortified, right? And the sun is the best way to get our vitamin D, but we also want to consider sun protection, skin protection. And everybody's going to be different in terms of like how much vitamin D they may need to supplement or not supplement. That is something that I do think that everybody should have looked at, is what is your level of vitamin D?
Great, thank you. How do you work with people? And I mean, you don't work in a hospital or anything anymore, right?
No, I work exclusively in my own practice, which is so great. So right out of here, this is the extra bedroom in our home. And I am so very lucky that I get to work with people all over the world. So I do have a group coaching program, and that's where most people work with me. I do have a one-on-one coaching program, although that program is very limited to the number of patients I accept at one time, just because I do provide very close one-on-one care and attention. So I actually have a group coaching program that is ending today, like, or in terms of like closing today, if anybody's interested. But group coaching and one-on-one coaching is my primary way. People can also find me on my website where I add blogs and nutrition information. And there's more to come. I have some really good projects on the horizon for 2025.
Great. And it's just, I don't want to be distracted talking to you, which is why you got to give me guys a few minutes after the show ends, because she's got a lot of clickable links and you'll be able to get in touch with her. Well, this has just been you're just so, I just love your energy. You know, were you like that even, I'm guessing you were probably like that all through treatment, I bet you.
For the most part, I think I was. Yeah, I mean, I was the person joking around at treatment and doing fun things. And, there's a picture of me like playing with the IV poles and all that during treatment. I mean, I do think humor is one way through it, and it's not to ignore our emotions around it, but how else, I had someone commented on an Instagram post that I was poking fun at my own cancer diagnosis, right? And someone
I
told,
love it. That's what I try to do. And I hope people
yeah,
start laughing now because I'm going to be performing comedy in Vegas about
yeah.
this. Labor Day weekend. The tickets just went on sale yesterday, guys, at
That's
the early bird
amazing.
prices. But I hope now that I've come forward and I hope people will laugh because I think it's hilarious. And so does Dr. Goldhammer. But when I was performing it without coming out, people were like, they weren't laughing. I'm like, you didn't think that was funny? I think it's hilarious. Like,
There's
I
a
love,
new there's a new acceptance when you have cancer, right? Like I joke all the time that so my mom has had a double mastectomy as well. And so like we can say jokes back and forth to each other because we've both experienced it. Like on her anniversary of her mastectomy, I sent her a meme that said, I was gonna tell you a joke so hard that you would laugh your tits off, but I see that already happened, right?
oh my,
Like,
I love
like you
that.
just have to like, but we do joke that like non-cancer survivors can't joke about that with us, right? Like, what do you mean you're talking about my fake boobs? Like, no, you can't talk about that.
Yeah.
But it's all in good fun. And someone
Yep.
said
Yep.
that comment someone said was like, how dare you make fun of cancer? And I'm like, well, I am a cancer patient, but you have to
I know.
have
I wish people would
to
just chill because they don't understand that laughter actually improves T cell activity and helps fight cancer, and it helps keep us mentally able to withstand the battle that we're going through. Like I love it. Like because the word "how are you" is so trite. People ask it in the world, just in general, like on the phone, and they don't really listen to the answer. But a lot of times what I'll do is people say, "How are you?" Go, "I got cancer." How do you think I am? Like that. I say it like that. And if they know, they'll crack up. I wouldn't say
yeah,
that to somebody that doesn't know, right?
right.
Or
Yes,
with my husband,
exactly.
sometimes, like if he gets a little pissy with me, I'll go, like maybe I'll say, like, could you take the garbage out? And it's like still, and I'm like, I have cancer. Could you take it out? And then,
Yep. And that's we call that the cancer card, right?
yeah,
In our
yeah.
house. And my brother has like that dry humor too. And it was just at Christmas time and he said something and I was like, I have cancer. I've had cancer. And he goes, how long are you going to pull that card for? And I'm like, forever, forever.
That's right. We have the right to do that. Oh, this is great. It's so great talking to you. Well, I'll be your cancer text buddy. I love jokes. And actually, I have the best joke for your husband. I can't tell it on the air, but it's about a pharmacist, and it is like the funny. I told it at the Plantrician conference to a bunch of pharmacists, but I wasn't being recorded, so I'm worried about when people hear me do comedy. They're like, oh, I can't believe she uses those words. But hey. I was a comedian before I was a chef. What can I tell you?
It's
Okay.
actually funny. My husband leaves jokes for vegan jokes for me, and they're all like making fun of vegan, but we are vegan. So like yeah, so
Absolutely.
we're all about the humor. Thank you
Well,
so much for
God,
having me,
yeah,
Chef
yeah,
AJ.
absolutely. Come to the Vegas conference because we actually have a vegan comedy night. Like I'm not,
Wow.
I was the last add-on because I don't consider myself a professional comedian. We have like real comedians,
Wow.
like that work and open for other comedians. But before you go, Allison, one more question. What message of hope would you share with someone currently facing a cancer diagnosis?
Oh goodness. My message is one I've already said in here, and that's control the controllables and try to let the ones that you can't control go.
Wow, that's beautiful. Thanks so much, Allison.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Same here. And thanks all of you for watching day 20 of Thriving in the Face of Cancer. We both want you to know that wherever you are in your cancer journey, as long as you're still breathing, we believe there is still hope and that you too can thrive even in the face of cancer. Please tune in tomorrow at 1 p.m. Pacific time for day 21 of Thriving in the Face of Cancer with guest Danielle Hicks. She is the Chief Patient Officer at GoTo Foundation for Lung Cancer. Did you know that lung cancer, Allison, is the least funded and most stigmatized of all the cancers?
Wow. I didn't know it was the least funded, but the most stigmatized makes sense to me.
Yeah, because people did you smoke, So just like anybody with boobs can get breast cancer, and I have a male friend that had it, anybody with lungs can get lung cancer.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You're the best. I want to be your best friend now.
Oh, welcome. Let's do
Yeah,
it.
but you got it. I'm not coming to Wisconsin. It is, you told me it was 1 degree there, and I'm freezing
Yeah.
at 34. So you got to
Yeah. Yeah. Let's maybe only come to Wisconsin in the summer or